There was a woman named Hannah who had spent many years praying for her family. She did not pray only when things were bad. She prayed when things were calm too, because she knew life could change quickly. She prayed for her husband, for her children, for peace in the home, for protection on the road, for wisdom in decisions, for healing in sickness, and for mercy in hard times. Her prayers were simple and honest. She did not always use fancy words. She spoke from the heart, and she believed that God heard her even when no one else noticed. At times it seemed like her prayers were small compared to the problems in front of her. Bills grew. Tension rose. Her husband became quiet and heavy with stress. One son started making poor choices. Her daughter withdrew into silence. The house, once full of laughter, began to feel stretched thin. Some evenings Hannah would stand in the kitchen after everyone had gone to sleep and feel the weight of it all. She would look at the dark windows and wonder how long the struggle would last. But even in those moments, she kept praying. She prayed while washing dishes. She prayed while folding clothes. She prayed while sitting in traffic. She prayed while waiting for the kettle to boil. She prayed when she was calm and when she was afraid. Sometimes her words were only a few sentences. Sometimes she could only whisper names. Sometimes she had no strength for long prayers, so she let tears do what words could not. She believed that God understood tears too. Years passed, and not everything changed at the pace she hoped. That was the hardest part. Many people think prayer is only powerful when results come quickly, but Hannah's life taught her that prayer also works in hidden ways. She did not always see immediate answers. Sometimes it felt like heaven was silent. Sometimes she wondered whether she had done something wrong, whether her faith was too weak, or whether her prayers had somehow missed their mark. But deep down, she could not let go of the truth that had carried her all these years. God had not forgotten her family. Her husband had become tired from the pressures of life. He worked long hours and carried worries he did not know how to share. At times he seemed distant, not because he stopped caring, but because he did not know how to rest his mind. Hannah wanted to fix everything for him, but she learned that love is not always about fixing. Sometimes it is about standing near someone while they struggle. She began to notice that her quiet prayers gave him strength even when he did not know it. She learned that the atmosphere of a home can change when one heart keeps praying. Her son was harder to understand. He grew restless and frustrated. He wanted quick success and easy answers. He felt pressure from friends, pressure from school, pressure from life, and he did not always handle it well. He began making decisions that worried Hannah deeply. Some nights, she stayed awake waiting for him to come home. Some mornings, she looked at him and saw exhaustion in his eyes. She tried talking to him, guiding him, warning him, and comforting him, but there were seasons when words did not seem to reach him. Still, she kept praying. Her daughter was quiet in a different way. She smiled, but not as freely as before. She was present, but guarded. Hannah sensed that she carried feelings she did not know how to explain. Some children act out loudly, while others suffer silently. Hannah learned to watch carefully, not to control her children, but to understand them. She learned that a mother's prayer must sometimes be patient enough to listen before it speaks. One afternoon, after a difficult week, Hannah sat alone in her room and felt a deep heaviness settle over her. Nothing had completely broken. Nothing dramatic had happened, but the slow pressure of family life had made her tired. She thought about all the prayers she had prayed. She thought about all the nights she had cried. She thought about the times she had asked God to protect her family when they traveled, to save her children from wrong paths, to guard her marriage, to provide for their needs, and to keep peace in the home. She wondered if those prayers still mattered after all this time. That is when a quiet peace came over her heart. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was gentle and sure. She felt as if God was reminding her that her prayers had not expired. They were not dead because time had passed. They were not wasted because the answer had not yet appeared in the way she expected. They were still alive in heaven. They were still working in the unseen places. They were still part of the story being written over her family. That message changed something inside her. For a long time, Hannah had been measuring prayer by visible results. She thought if she prayed for enough years and saw no change, maybe the prayer had lost power. But now she began to understand something deeper. Prayer is not a contract that expires because humans grow tired. Prayer is not forgotten because seasons change. Prayer is not limited by the speed of our understanding. When a mother prays for her family, that prayer does not vanish into nothing. It stays before God, carried by mercy, wisdom, and timing that human eyes cannot fully see. The next morning, Hannah woke up with the same house, the same responsibilities, and the same unfinished burdens, but she had a different spirit. She no longer thought of her prayers as old words from the past. She thought of them as living seeds. Seeds can look silent for a long time, but they are not dead just because the soil is still dark. They are working beneath the surface. They are waiting for the right season. They are growing roots before they grow fruit. That became her picture of prayer. She began to pray with new confidence. She did not pray from panic as much as before. She prayed from faith. She prayed with more peace. She prayed with trust that God was already moving through her family, even when she could not see it. She prayed for her husband's heart to find rest. She prayed for her son to grow wise and strong. She prayed for her daughter to feel safe and open. She prayed for her home to become a place where God's presence will be felt again. She prayed not because she was desperate only, but because she believed there are still difficult days. Prayer did not make life instantly easy. Her husband still had bad days. Her son still made mistakes. Her daughter still had quiet moments that worried her. But now Hannah was no longer broken by every setback. She had learned to see the bigger picture. She understood that God often answers prayer through process. The answer may come as correction, growth, protection, conviction, healing, or a slow change of heart. The answer is not always quick, but it is always meaningful. One day her son came home late and looked troubled. Hannah noticed the tension on his face. She did not rush to lecture him. She had learned that fear can make a parent speak too soon and too hard. Instead, she gave him space. She made sure he had something warm to eat. She kept her tone gentle. Later, when the house was quiet, she prayed for him again. This time she asked God to protect him from wrong choices and from the voices that pulled him away from wisdom. She asked God to place the right people in his path. She asked God to make him uncomfortable with sin and comfortable with truth. She asked God to bring him back to himself. The answer to that prayer did not come overnight, but Hannah began to see small signs. Her son started talking more openly about his struggles. He stopped hiding some things. He admitted that life felt heavy and that he was not always sure how to carry it. That honesty was not a perfect solution, but it was a beginning. Hannah knew that honesty is often the first crack in the wall where light can enter. She thanked God for that small opening. Her daughter also began to change. One evening she sat with Hannah and spoke about fear she had been carrying. She was worried about school, about friendships, about whether she was good enough, about whether she was seen. Hannah listened carefully. She did not rush her. She did not make the conversation about herself. She simply stayed present. It was one of the most healing moments in the home because it reminded Hannah that prayer often prepares the heart for truth. Prayer opens doors and people that pressure cannot open. Her husband, too, began to soften. He was still tired, but he was less closed off. He began to share more. He began to sit and talk a little longer. He began to show appreciation for the things Hannah had been carrying alone for so long. He still had responsibilities and stresses, but the walls in his heart were not as high as before. Hannah saw this as part of God's work. She understood now that prayer had been covering him in all the years he looked silent. This did not mean the family became perfect. It meant they began to heal. That is different. Healing is not the same as perfection. Healing is slow. Healing is often quiet. Healing includes setbacks and steps forward, but is real. Hannah began to see that all her years of prayer had not been ignored. They had been shaping the family in ways she could not measure at the time. She thought back to the many nights when she had prayed over her children while they slept. She remembered touching their foreheads gently and asking God to mark them with favor, wisdom, and protection. She remembered praying over their future spouses, over their careers, over their choices, over their friendships, over their faith. At the time, those prayers had felt small. Now she saw them differently. She understood that heaven values what people often call ordinary. A prayer whispered in a quiet room may carry more power than 1,000 anxious words spoken in fear. Hannah also learned that expired is not a word God uses for sincere prayer. Human beings grow impatient. Human beings forget. Human beings think in short seasons. But God sees the whole road. A prayer prayed in faith does not vanish because years passed. It remains alive in the purpose of God. Sometimes the prayer continues working in the child long after the parent has stopped expecting it. Sometimes the prayer becomes the very reason a person turns away from danger at the right moment. Sometimes the answer shows up in a changed attitude, a closed door, a new friend, a protected step, a softened heart, or a return to truth. That understanding brought Hannah deep comfort. She stopped asking, "Did my prayers work?" and began asking, "How is God already working through them?" That shift in thinking changed her life. It made her less fearful and more thankful. It helped her stay steady instead of becoming consumed by uncertainty. It also gave her courage to keep praying. She no longer treated prayer like a last resort. She treated it like a living covering over her family. Months turned into another season. Small changes continued. Her husband became more open. Her son started making better decisions, slowly and not always perfectly, but clearly. Her daughter became more expressive. The home felt lighter. It was not suddenly free of all problems, but the heaviness that once ruled it began to break. The atmosphere was different. There was more laughter. There was more honesty. There was more peace. Hannah knew this was not her doing alone. It was the mercy of God moving through years of faithful prayer. One day, a younger woman from the neighborhood asked Hannah how she kept going without losing hope. Hannah answered simply. She said that prayer for family is not a one-day thing. It is not a trend. It is not a short season of panic. It is a covering that stays alive. She said that even when you do not see immediate results, your prayers are still before God. She said that a mother's tears are not wasted. She said that a father's concern is not ignored. She said that God keeps what is given to him in faith. She also said that prayer should not replace action, but it should guide action. She had learned that prayers for family work best when joined with patience, wisdom, honesty, and love. She could pray for her son, but she also had to speak truth to him. She could pray for her husband, but she also had to show kindness and support. She could pray for her daughter, but she also had to listen and create safety. Prayer was the foundation, but care was the living expression of it. That became part of her guidance to others. She told them not to confuse delay with failure. She told them not to assume silence means absence. She told them not to stop praying, just because the family still had rough days. She told them that God may be working in places they cannot see. She told them to keep their words full of faith, because children remember what they hear repeatedly. She told them to speak blessing over their homes, peace over their tables, wisdom over their children, and mercy over their marriage. Her life became proof that family prayer can remain alive across time. Not every answer arrives the same way. Some answers are immediate, some are slow, some are hidden for a while, some come through deep interchange. But none of the prayers offered in faith are wasted. Hannah saw that her years of praying had helped shape the family, even when it looked like nothing was changing. The results had been growing quietly all along. She also learned not to blame herself for every wrong step her family took. That lesson came with relief. She had spent too many years wondering whether she had failed as a mother, whether she could have done more, whether her prayers had not been strong enough. But God began to show her that she is responsible to pray and love faithfully, not to control every outcome. That realization lifted a heavy burden from her shoulders. She could release what was not hers to carry and trust God with the rest. The family continued to grow. Her son found a better rhythm. Her daughter became more confident. Her husband learned to rest and share more openly. Hannah herself became stronger too, not because life was easy, but because her faith was refined through waiting. She no longer saw prayer as a desperate cry into darkness. She saw it as an act of trust in a God who sees the whole family, knows every heart, and works through time in ways people do not always understand. Years later, when Hannah looked at family photographs, she could see how far they had come. She could remember the seasons of worry and the seasons of quiet hope. She could remember the prayers whispered in kitchens, bedrooms, and parking lots. She could remember the tears no one saw and the faith that refused to die. She knew now that her prayers had never expired. They had been living all along. They had been carrying her family through danger, through correction, through healing, and through growth. That is the message this story leaves behind. Your prayers for your family do not expire when time passes. They do not become worthless because the answer was slow. They do not disappear because you grew tired. When they are spoken in faith, they remain alive before God. They work in hidden ways. They soften hearts. They protect children. They strengthen marriages. They bring people back from wrong paths. They create peace where there was tension. They invite mercy into places that were hard. So keep praying for your family. Keep speaking life. Keep asking God to cover the ones you love. Keep believing that heaven has heard you. Keep trusting that what was planted in prayer is still working. Keep going, even if the house is not fixed yet. Keep going, even if the child is still learning. Keep going, even if the marriage is still healing. Keep going, even if you're tired. Because your prayers are not expired. They are alive in God's care. Hannah's story became a simple reminder that family prayer is never wasted. It may not always bring instant change, but it builds a foundation that time cannot destroy. It covers people you love when you cannot be everywhere at once. It speaks when your words fail. It reaches what your hands cannot reach. It stays alive in heaven and continues to work on earth in ways only God fully sees. That is why the message is clear. Do not stop now. Do not call your prayers old. Do not think your tears were useless. Do not believe your faith was wasted. Your prayers for your family never expired. God heard every one of them, and He is still working through them.